time for the speakers. Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Earth Day event. It's good to see social media buzzing with Earth Day campaigns. I was surprised to see something nearby in a park this weekend too. So I wish I had time to go, but I had a lot of other things going on. Today's event is organized through a special alliance between the United Nations of Greater Philadelphia and Coalition for Peace Action. Both these organizations work closely with civil society and various other sectors to address the global challenges through education, advocacy, and for sustainable development, for peace economy, for nuclear disarmament, and other pressing issues. Climate action plays a big part of it too. And I would like to take a moment as we start today to thank Edward Aguilar, a board member for United Nations of Greater Philadelphia and Coalition for Peace Action, for playing a big part in bringing this event together. I also want to thank Reverend Robert Moore, Executive Director of Coalition for Peace Action, and Jen New, Executive Assistant for Coalition for Peace Action, for the support she has given us. Both of them have given us for this event. I also want to extend my gratitude to the sponsoring organizations, Nuclear Ban US, Granny's Peace Brigade Philadelphia, Sane Energy Project, Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania, and Citizens Climate Education Philly chapter. I'm very excited today and eagerly awaiting to hear the three inspiring speakers, Dr. Timon Wallace, Erica DeCranes, and Kim Frachek. Please note that the Q&A will be at the end, and you can submit your questions for the speakers to me directly in chat. And now we start the event, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Timon Wallace. Dr. Wallace is an accomplished author and activist, serving as the Executive Director of Nuclear Ban US. His recent work includes the second edition of his book, Warheads to Windmills, completed in December 2023. Dr. Wallace has written and campaigned extensively on peace and environmental issues throughout his career. He holds a PhD in peace studies from Bradford University, has directed peace-building projects in several countries, including Colombia, Guatemala, and Philippines. His book, Disarming the Nuclear Argument, The Truth About Nuclear Weapons, played a role in successful July 2017 United Nations negotiations for nuclear ban treaty, and serves as a handbook for those seeking a safer and saner world. So I feel very privileged today to hear him and other speakers. Dr. Wallace, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Manisha, and welcome to this event. I'm going to share my screen and talk a bit about my book. I have been giving a lot of presentations, so some of you may have heard some of this, and I did give a presentation to the Coalition for Peace Action about a year ago on this topic, Warheads to Windmills. This was before finishing the current book. As Manisha said, this is the latest edition. It gets bigger and bigger every time, and this one now has is packed full of information and footnotes for people who want to dig deeper into these issues. But I thought I would just summarize a little bit. So this is the book. If you haven't seen it, you can order it online or from your local bookshop or whatever. And as I said, this is the most recent edition of what was started in 2019 as a report, and it's gotten bigger and bigger as we get more and more details and try to provide the rationale behind some of these arguments. But the basic concept, which is pretty straightforward, really, when you think about it, we've got these two existential threats to the whole planet: climate change and nuclear war. There are other threats, obviously, and if you're living in Gaza or Ukraine right now, Eastern Ukraine, you're facing existential threats. But these are up there. These are serious problems that we have to address, and we know what the consequences will be. And the book is about the money and the jobs that could be released from one of these threats in order to solve the other, which seems like a no-brainer to me, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it's also about the need for cooperation. I mean, we are in a new Cold War with Russia over Ukraine. We're pumping the fuel for another Cold War with China over Taiwan, and we simply cannot solve either of these threats without working with both of those countries. And we differ on many of the tactics and strategies for addressing these two threats. But my argument in the book is that we're beyond the point where we can be talking about little steps here and there and baby steps and reductions and so on. When we're talking about existential threats to the planet, we have to be looking at what has to happen to prevent those two things. And that's not going to be easy. And the reason we're up against this problem, in my opinion, is primarily because the corporations that are making literally a killing out of the continued dependence on nuclear weapons and fossil fuels. And the book is not just about the problem, but it's about how we can actually fix this. And that's because we have power to put pressure on these corporations. And I'm going to talk about that. So I'm going to just run very briefly through these issues that are in the book. I hope you'll all read the book and have lots more questions, and we can talk about it further. But just to run through, I'm not going to spend time trying to convince you that climate or nuclear wars are a threat and how they're a threat. I'm going to focus on what we know already we need to do to address these. And in the first place, we're talking about the short-term addressing of climate change. And we know, because we have literally thousands of climate scientists telling us this, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we know that we're pumping about 60 gigatons, billion tons of carbon equivalent every year into the atmosphere, which we've been doing for decades, and we're still doing despite all the efforts that have been done with the Inflation Reduction Act and progress that's being made in certain parts of the country, in certain countries in Europe and so on. We're still increasing the carbon emissions globally. And unless we can get that down to 30, roughly half of what we're currently spewing out into the atmosphere, we are using up our carbon budget that protects us from overheating and the huge consequences that we will face if we do not address this. Now, by short term, we've been talking about 2030, which is getting closer and closer every day. But we can do this. We know what needs to be done. And one of my favorite books, I don't know how many people here have seen it, but it's called No Miracles Needed. And it's by Mark Jacobson at Stanford University. And he outlines in great detail for every country in the world, and more or less every country, and every state in the United States, he looks at what kind of electricity is being generated from where, and what it would take to move to 100% solar, wind, and water electricity. And it's totally doable. We have the technologies, we have the resources, we could do this. Electricity generation is the #1 producer of carbon, and we need to cut, if we're going to cut 30 gigatons of carbon out of our emissions every year, we have to focus on electricity generation. The next biggest emitter of carbon is from vehicles, cars, and I mean, we in this country separate cars from SUVs, but they're cars. If we, and this doesn't just mean transferring all the cars that we have from gasoline to electricity. We have to cut down the huge number of cars on the road that are spewing out carbon emissions. And we have to do that with better public transportation and electrified rail and so on. But we've got to cut, I mean, it's the second largest source of carbon emissions globally, and it's the largest in the United States is coming from cars. So we've got to cut cars, we've got to cut electricity, and we've finally got to cut the heating of buildings and industry, low temperature heating of use in industry. Those three alone would almost get us down to where we need to be by 2030. And in addition, we need to be planting trees because the trees take time to grow. They're our number one source of carbon capture and reducing the carbon from the atmosphere. And if we don't start planting on a major scale, we're not going to have those trees when we need them. So that's the short term. The medium term, I only talk about the short term and medium term because if we don't do these things, we're not going to have a long term to talk about. But the medium term, we need to get our emissions down to net zero, which is roughly going to be somewhere around 7 gigatons of carbon, because that's how much we could be absorbing from wetlands and forests and the seas if we did all the other work that we need to do to reduce as much as possible our emissions. But we need to do the things in the medium term that are harder to do in the short term. I mean, we know we can reduce carbon emissions from the production of steel and cement. Those are the two major industries that are pumping carbon into the atmosphere, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time to cut emissions from aviation, for example. We know we can do it. We have electric planes already flying in the air. We have plans already for larger passenger planes, but it's going to take time, and we need to do that, and we need to prepare all these things in the coming years if we're going to save the planet from climate catastrophe. And if we don't do that, we're crazy. So we know also what it's going to cost, which is a lot. This is in billions. You can see down in the bottom, if you can see on your screen, the very bottom right-hand corner, 5,300 billion. So that's $5.3 trillion. That's, I mean, there are different ways of cutting the cake, as it were. This is based on a climate justice approach, which means making sure that we're not just putting up gigantic windmills that are run by utility companies, but actually putting wind on farms all across this country, putting solar on rooftops all across this country, and giving people their own electricity sources and their own control over the electricity. But also all the other things that need to be done fairly and justly, including internationally, to make our contribution. This is the US we're talking about here, but we're looking at the global picture. So I'm not going to go into the details. It's all in the book, but just to give you an overview, this is divided between loans that would be repaid over a period of time. So for instance, if we put money from the government to make sure every household can put solar panels on their roof, and then they use that money that they're saving from electricity bills to repay the loan, basically the same amount of money, we would get that money back. So it's not an expense as such. Other things like the renewing the grid and battery storage and building a high-speed rail system, those things are expenses. But of course, again, they're giving us huge amounts of benefits, including a planet to live on. And then, so it's not just the money, it's also all the brain power. It's the scientists, the engineers, the technicians, people that we need to be putting their best thinking into. As I said, we know what's needed for the short term, but for the medium term, there's all kinds of more technical developments that are needed in terms of putting wind on rooftops. One of my favorite approaches to electricity generation is run-of-the-river hydro, so we don't need dams and gigantic turbines that chew up the fish. We need old-fashioned old-fashioned water wheels like you see in old paintings. Those can generate huge amounts of electricity. We need to be developing all these new ways of making sure we can protect the environment and protect other species while we're doing this transition and providing electricity that we need to live on. And all the other areas, like I mentioned, aviation and steel and cement, these all require engineers and scientists and people that are working on these full time on a massive effort. And at the moment, instead, they're making weapons. And of course, we need the international cooperation, as I said. This is a map of the countries that are, and parts of countries like California, that have committed to a plan to get rid of not just coal, but also oil and gas. And as you can see, it's missing, I mean, there's a few more countries in there by now, Colombia and so on, but we're missing the US, China, Russia, India. These key players have got to be working together if we're going to solve this. And they're currently the countries pointing nuclear weapons at each other. So again, just very briefly, some numbers on the nuclear weapons side. You know, I'm sure all of you remember the phrase a trillion dollar triad, which was actually back in Obama's administration. They estimated a plan for rebuilding all of our entire nuclear arsenal at a cost of $1 trillion. That was over a 30-year period. Now we're looking at more than $1 trillion just in the next 10 years. And over 30 years, we're talking much closer to 3 trillion, which is what I was saying we need for the climate in terms of direct government expenditure. So we're talking about huge amounts of money, and we're also talking about just huge amounts of money that's being wasted on nuclear weapons which do nothing except threaten the planet. Now, in terms of jobs, again, the STEM jobs coming out of universities, you know, they have a choice. They're being sucked into the nuclear and other weapons production because that's where they want all the engineers. But these people are needed to be designing the wind turbines and the wave power and all these other things. So these are just some examples. It's all documented in the book. This was not in the book. This I found just preparing for this webinar. It's a kind of a fanciful diagram of where we're heading if we don't do something about the nuclear arms race. As you can see in the left-hand side of this is the graph that probably many of you have seen, which is showing the growth of nuclear arsenals, the US in blue and Russia or the Soviet Union at the time in red or pink. And that peaked during the Cold War. And then at the end of the Cold War, it went down to where it is today, which is great. But, you know, we are heading for a massive new nuclear arms race if we don't find a way of working with Russia. No matter what we think of the invasion of Ukraine or what we think about Putin, we're talking about the survival of the planet. We have to work together with these countries. So we don't like killing birds, so we are aiming to feed two birds with one stone by tackling both of these threats, climate and nuclear weapons, together. And it's a no-brainer. I'm just checking my time. How are we doing here? Okay, got a few more minutes. I want to talk about how we get there, because we know what's standing in the way of this, and it's these companies right here. These companies are investing millions in lobbying members of Congress and the White House, in financing their re-election campaigns and so on. You know about the revolving door where these, defense secretary comes straight out of Raytheon, goes into the Pentagon, and they just go round and round. These companies are calling the shots in Washington. They're making, in some cases, more than 1,000% return on investment. So they invest $4 million in lobbying Congress, and they get a contract worth $4 billion in return. That's 1,000%. So these companies have a huge vested interest in keeping things going, and that's exactly what they're doing. And they're the single biggest block to us being able to address these issues. It's not because the people of this country want nuclear weapons. I mean, there are some people who are convinced we have to have them. That's also partly because these companies pour millions into their propaganda and, you know, the mainstream media and so on, to give us these sound bites and these narratives about why we have to have these weapons. But if you look at opinion polls, most people do not want nuclear weapons, even in this country. And certainly in other countries, there's overwhelming majorities who do not want nuclear weapons. And yet we have them because these companies call the shots in Washington. And it's the same with these companies in the fossil fuel industry. So we're up against these billion-dollar industries and their influence in Congress. And the good news is that we have ways of influencing these companies, and we've done it before and we can do it again. And one of the tools that we have, which we didn't have in the 1980s when many of these tools were used very effectively, we didn't have a treaty that is being signed by and ratified by countries around the world where these companies operate. This is where Honeywell has operations, 110 countries. They have projects, they have plants, they have business partnerships, they have contracts, but they also have suppliers, they have investors. These companies are multinational companies, corporations. They're working in all these different countries. And that was Honeywell. This is another one, Airbus. Here's Thales, which is a French company. But you can look at all these companies, whether it's fossil fuels or nuclear weapons, they're all over the map. And that is where we have some power, because these are the countries that have so far ratified. So the countries in blue have ratified the Nuclear Ban Treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The countries in green have signed the treaty and are in the process of ratifying it through their parliament. The countries in yellow are countries that have voted for the treaty but have not yet signed it. And the countries in orange are under enormous pressure from not just from public opinion, but from their own governments, from their Congress and their parliaments. Germany, for example, has 93% of public opinion wants Germany to sign this treaty. And hundreds of members of the German parliament have committed to that. And the German government is a coalition government with a number of parties, two of which are committed to signing this treaty. So it's only a matter of time before countries like Germany, you may have seen Australia, for example, had elections this past year and have a new Labour government. The Prime Minister of Australia is committed personally to signing this treaty. So these are only a matter of time before these countries are joining on board, and the pressure on these companies is going to be enormous because of this one article in the Nuclear Ban Treaty, which says that it's prohibited to assist in any way in the production or maintenance of these weapons. And my favorite example is in Ireland. I don't know if we've got any Irish descent here, but Ireland is my favorite country right now because they're the first country to have divested completely from fossil fuels. They're the first country to have divested from nuclear weapons. And they have this law called the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Act, which actually says that a person that's found guilty under this law is liable to a fine or imprisonment for life. I mean, that is a pretty strong law, and it's enforceable in Ireland with the court systems and the police and the prison system. And if more countries do this, we're facing this kind of pressure on companies like Honeywell, who decides the CEO of Honeywell wants to go on a golfing holiday to Ireland and finds himself up against the laws of Ireland. So the fossil fuel treaty is a little bit behind, but we're working on the same kind of thing. And we know from previous efforts, not just from the apartheid movement and so on, but from the nuclear weapons disarmament movement in the 1980s, where these companies were facing enormous pressure and they decided they had to pull out of the nuclear weapons industry. So we have these tools, we've got to use them. If you want more information, please read the book. And I'll wait to hear from the other speakers. I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Timon. Ed Aguilar, are you going next? You are muted. Ed, you're muted.
So first, I want to say thank you, Timon. That was a fantastic presentation. Can people hear me? Okay. Because I'm not appearing on the screen. So, but next we have someone I'm delighted to introduce. Erica DeCranes is a friend and a well-known activist in the Princeton area. She is a city council member in Allentown, New Jersey. She's a city planner as well. And she is, of course, a board member at CFPA, the Coalition for Peace Action, one of our lead sponsors here today. So thank you for coming, Erica, and please unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone.
Please go ahead.
Yep. Can you hear me okay? Excellent.
Yep.
So thanks for that introduction. So as Ed mentioned, I am a member of the Coalition for Peace Action. I've been a member for over 10 years now. I was an intern, then I was the assistant director, and now I'm a proud board member. I also, I'm a member of my town council, as Ed mentioned, so that's Allentown, New Jersey, not Pennsylvania. So we're smack in the center of New Jersey, small town. I'll talk a little bit about my experience there as it relates to the climate change and sustainability a bit later. And I also work I work in philanthropy for a nonprofit organization that provides vision care and glasses in low and middle income countries as well. So thank you to CFPA and to the UNAGP for inviting me here today. Just a little reminder for those of you who don't know about the Coalition for Peace Action. It's a grassroots citizen organization bringing together people of all ages, backgrounds, professions, and political persuasions in support of 3 goals. So those goals are global abolition of nuclear weapons, the establishment of a peace economy, and a halt to weapons trafficking at home and abroad. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the abolition of nuclear weapons and how it relates to climate change. I'm not an expert, but I'll bring a little bit of my experience kind of from a grassroots level, talk a little bit about my experience with CFPA, but also as a town council person and just as an informed citizen as well. So the Coalition for Peace Action has our No Wars, No Warming campaign, which really focuses on the intersection of war and climate change, which is key to the topic today. I'm going to put the Coalition for Peace Action's website in the chat in case anyone wants to look. So I'm just going to dive right into the topic today. So nuclear weapons, war, and climate change are deeply interrelated topics. And of course, Timon touched on this a lot in his presentation. So I'm just gonna zoom out a little bit here and talk about how they're related in terms of the strain on resources, power imbalances, and structures. So climate change is recognized by the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Society as a major factor in conflict. Some places that we see this include Somalia, where we've seen droughts that have really strained unstable structures, heightened tensions, and caused displacements in the region. We've also seen this in Mali, Iraq, Myanmar, and many other places in the world. 70% of the most climate change vulnerable countries are also among the most politically and economically fragile, according to the UNEP. So that's a huge number, 70% where these intersect on a physical global basis. I'd also like to point out the effects specifically on women's health. So I'm quite passionate about where gender also plays a role in both climate change, nuclear weapons, and really all aspects of policy. So women typically in low and middle income countries, which are largely affected by climate change, a lot of women work as smallholder farmers, whether this is with animals as well as crops. And these are professions that are particularly affected by climate change for pretty obvious reasons when it comes to drought and other impacts, as well as flooding. My organization works a lot in Bangladesh, where we see effects of flooding as well, and that really impacts women. It also impacts women in regards to nutritional requirements of maternal health. So that's a really other important factor to note as we talk about how these issues relate to each other. So on the flip side, of course, war is terrible for climate on so many different levels. When it comes to nuclear war, this would be catastrophic for the Earth and climate. We talk about nuclear winter, so the dropping of temperature that would come from a potential nuclear disaster and having ash in the atmosphere. This would cause starvation, ozone damage. We also are looking at ocean acidification and the destruction of wildlife. All of this would then exacerbate issues with migration as well for people all over the world. I also want to point out, though, that conventional warfare also creates mass destruction. I know, of course, nuclear weapons is the worst case scenario, but our conventional warfare also causes a lot of drain on energy and resources. I recently read an article in The Guardian that had this crazy statistic that I wanted to share with you, which is that CO2 emissions from the Israel-Gaza conflict actually surpassed the annual emissions for the whole country of the Central African Republic in 1 year. So just to put that into perspective, one conflict that's relatively localized in terms of physical localization, could cause more emissions than a whole country in a whole year. So that's just that really stood out to me. Now, Timon really touched on this, which is something I didn't immediately think of, but is so important. Nuclear proliferation and conflict and war in general also creates a drain on STEM talent. So really important to note that if we weren't concentrating all of our best and brightest on topics such as nuclear proliferation, imagine what those really brilliant people could be putting into their efforts into solving the world's biggest climate problems. In addition, the Pentagon is one of the world's, I believe it's the world's single biggest fossil fuel polluter, and 5% of global emissions are linked to conflict or military across the world. So war in itself is a polluter, which is a really important factor to note. So I'm going to put, after I'm done speaking, I'll put the CFPA's fact sheet into the chat as well, which has a few more details about the relationship between nuclear weapons, war, and climate change. So what can we do to help really address these challenges? So I'll start off just by noting that the Coalition for Peace Action has found enormous strength in coalition work and the importance of partnerships. So partnerships bring very technical issues and expertise to the table. Many of our groups also have different relationships with different legislators, and there's also great power in numbers. A few years ago, I was part of the People's Climate March to Washington, D.C., and it was just an amazing show of peaceful strength to our issues and to our work. So that's really powerful as well. CFPA has worked with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, which focuses on wildlife in the Delaware River area, as well as drinking water and the importance that the Delaware River plays in our drinking water. Also, Food and Water Watch, who focus on corporate and government accountability and legislation. Berks Gas Truth, who's doing some great work on fracking in Pennsylvania. The Sunrise Movement, who's advocating a Green New Deal. I encourage you, I don't have time to dive into that today, but I encourage you to look more into that if you're interested. And Empower New Jersey, which is seeking to limit fossil fuel projects in New Jersey. The Coalition for Peace Action has also found some strength and partnership with local religious organizations of all denominations who really want to see a stop to both conflict and climate change. And of course, the UNAGP is one of our great partners here as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some action items and specific issues to New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So the first, probably most key aspect of work that's being done is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, also known as RGGI. RGGI is a coalition of 11 states in the Northeast New Jersey is a member. Pennsylvania is a member, but their court recently voted this down, and Governor Shapiro is appealing. So the status is a bit unclear there. RGGI caps CO2 emissions of power plants and allows for member states to trade allowances, and then to invest the money gained from those trades back into climate and energy efficiency initiatives. So RGGI has reduced pollution, improved air quality, and advocates also claim that it has lowered energy bills for individuals and created jobs. So this is a really important initiative. Also mentioned the plastic bag ban in New Jersey, which is a great success, and a real focus on PFAS. So these forever chemicals, which have been found in New Jersey. Well, really everyone's drinking water, but recently there was some, this was found in some of our federal military bases, which caused a lot of controversy. Wind energy is very prominent for New Jersey, especially given our location on the shore, which the Murphy administration has noted that they want to increase offshore wind as a goal. And we've also could really be pushing for more specific regulations on New Jersey greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the language around this is a little bit amorphous and not really specific. So that would be another thing. And in Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro has taxed fracking and capped wells, but we'd like to see a ban on fracking as well. So really quickly to end, I just want to talk about some role of local initiatives as well. So a lot of local townships and municipalities have green teams or environmental commissions. So if you're interested in getting involved locally, I would say that's a great place to start. New Jersey has a Sustainable New Jersey initiative, which is a great way for towns to learn about ways that they can be more sustainable and to gain some notoriety for that, as well as support from grants and other organizations. These include initiatives like EV charging, hosting green fairs, creating energy efficient light environments in our town buildings, as well as getting hybrid vehicles for our police and DPW. Department of Public Works organizations. So there's much to be done to prevent climate change and conflict on the local, state, and national levels, and of course international as well. But step one is to get educated on these issues and their intersectionality. So on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for listening today, and I will pass it over to Ed and Kim. And I'm going to pop that fact sheet in the chat as well that I mentioned.
Thank you, Erica. That was a wonderful presentation, extremely informative. And next, I'm also delighted to have with us Kim Fracek. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You'll correct me if I'm not. Kim is the director of the Sane Energy Project based in New York. She has great experience on clean energy and preventing climate catastrophe in various ways. She has worked against polluting oil pipelines, for example, the Brooklyn proposed pipeline. She has worked against fracking in New York. New York is one of the few states that actually has banned fracking. And she is involved in many new ideas, including, I'm sure she'll tell us in more detail, thermal energy, how that will really help on the climate. So Kim, thank you for coming, and please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting Sane Energy Project to come and speak to you all. I have a presentation, so I will share my screen so you all have something to look at. Go into slideshow mode. So Sane Energy Project is a grassroots group. We're about 12 years old. We are based in New York, but a number of us in Sane Energy Project grew up in Pennsylvania. So we kind of know what's happening on the other side of the pipeline, as we like to say. And we are here to connect the dots for people on fracked gas infrastructure and the comprehensive picture of fracking. So our mission is to replace all fracked gas infrastructure with public power. We focus on New York State, and we keep our eye on our region. And we build every campaign through a lens of social, racial, and ecological justice. We make sure to do a lot of listening with communities. And I'll move forward. So I was asked to sort of come here and speak about more about like the region, like how we all connect. So one of the projects that Sane Energy started in 2014 was the You Are Here map. It's an online free resource for all of us in the movement, youareheremap.org, that we work together with Frack Tracker Alliance to build a regional map of all the fracking infrastructure. And the premise of it was to make sure that people know how big it is. It's not just the pipeline that's coming to your community, but how we are all connected by this terrible infrastructure. We want to be connected by our rivers and lakes and streams and air and land. We don't want to have fossil fuels connecting us. One of the other wonderful things about the map is that you can type in your address to find out what's near you, and we aim to make sure that local people can connect with other local people, other local resistance groups. And we also, in each of the dots that you can touch on in here, we link to the Physicians for Social Responsibility fracking compendium, so people can understand what compressor stations and power plants and all the other things that go into the fracking infrastructure. Some of the tactics that we have used over the years is a massive diversity of tactics. We, go and participate with our community boards and elected officials. We do a lot of in-person, fun, artful actions, like we'll get giant bike rides together to bike along the path of a pipeline to educate people. We do lots of rallies and marches. We have locked ourselves down to pipelines numerous times to halt the construction. We've built the map, as you can see. We make sure to do lots of teach-ins, send comments, petitions. We have filed lawsuits. So each tactic, we have been very successful in stopping a lot of infrastructure, which we're really proud of. So some of the successes, our most recent success was halting a massive fracked gas pipeline that was cutting Brooklyn in half, called the North Brooklyn Pipeline. We stopped the final phase of it. And we also stopped 2 new liquefied fracked gas vaporizers that would have been at the head of the pipeline. And it's not very far from my house. So I was very pleased to see that get vetoed at our Public Service Commission meeting. We've also shut down with the help from our allies in New Jersey, Port Ambrose LNG port that would have been the size of the Empire State Building, floating liquefied fracked gas off the coast of both New York and New Jersey. So we shut that down, thankfully, in 2015. And we've also shut down, together with our allies in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the Williams-Nessie pipeline. And we continue to stay very vigilant on that because the company continues to want to come back and refile, but we've just got word just last week that they have officially withdrawn their application from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So, it's all the communities and all the tactics put together that make us win. Just a little snippet about how, the industry really sees our region. They see it as where they can drill. They see it as, where they can store their waste, where they can spray their waste on our roads, where they can store their chemicals and steal our water from our rivers, lakes, and streams, and then where they want to sell it to. This is how they see us. They don't see us as where we love to hike and where we love to build our homes and our work and our families and travel and enjoy our lives. They see us definitely as just an extraction, a commodity to extract. You know, we love where we live. These are several people that we worked with on the You Are Here map to put it together originally. We asked folks, you know, stand, you know, where the dot on your map is, and these were some of the folks that we have worked with over the years. We love where we live. You love where you live. We need to protect it. Some of the issues that we face are that we know that, you know, fracking is bigger than just the drilling. Fracking is, you know, the silica mining for the sand that goes into the fracking hole to drill. We know they need to store the LNG. We know that they flare off into, you know, the atmosphere. We know they build pipelines, they have trucks. It's a whole bunch of different types of infrastructure that goes into it. So yes, it was great that New York State banned fracking, but we definitely still need to ban the comprehensive picture of fracking to prevent, you know, Pennsylvania from still getting fracked. And this is, you know, where my family lives and where many of you live. You know, fracked gas, it's funny, I've had this slide in our presentations for, you know, several years. And the only thing that changes in here is if greenhouse is the last phrase, if greenhouse gas is not reduced within the next, I remember when we had this, the next 13 years, we only had 13 years left, and we were terrified. We're like, 13 years is so fast. And each time I give a presentation and I use this slide, you know, the years keep reducing, and we're incrementally only making changes. So we have to really rethink about our activism and how we're going to really start shutting this down in a real serious way. We know that, you know, this is on behalf of the Clean Air Council, that this affects all of the reproductive, nervous system, respiratory systems, immune systems, cardiovascular, digestive systems, all the chemicals that happen from fracked gas infrastructure affect all of our systems in our incredible, sacred, beautiful bodies. We know that it's bad for democracy. We know very clear that the reason that this is happening is because politicians get bribed by the industry. It's not, you know, this is the age-old story, but it's something that we need to put a stop to. We know that, you know, if we zero in a little bit on, you know, fracked gas infrastructure like pipelines, they need compressor stations every 30 to 50 miles in order to compress the gas to push it through the pipeline to the next compressor station. And that's how it moves through the pipelines. This was a photo of from our friend's house in Minisink, New York. This is a compressor station. They disguise it to look like a barn. And then at night, this is exactly the same picture through a FLIR camera where you can see the emissions. This is constantly coming out. And people on the street have developed neurological disorders. And then this is how many compressor stations we are looking at regionally that we need to shut down. We know that new compressor stations equal new power plants. This is also, you know, they just incrementally increase the kinds of infrastructure that they're building. And that power plants have even higher emissions than compressor stations alone. We know that, you know, the name of the game with the fracking industry is liquefied natural, quote unquote, gas. We've heard a lot about LNG from Biden, you know, saying that he's halting liquefied natural gas exports, but we know this is temporary and it was sort of a political chess move for him. But this is like something when we think about ourselves getting fracked here in our region, we have to think globally. This is all the global money that these people, that the extractors are using to harm us, to gain money for a very small percentage of people on this earth. We know that LNG is worse for the climate than just shale fracked gas alone, because of the refrigeration it takes and the way that they liquefy fracked gas by turning it from a vapor to a liquid. Is methane needs to be refrigerated to negative 261 degrees Fahrenheit in order for the methane to become a liquid. And so then they can store it, they can ship it, and all that energy that goes into it exacerbates the crime of fracked gas infrastructure. We've been working really clear on what we want to build instead. We know that we need to heat our homes. We know that, definitely in New York City where I live, their heating and cooling is a huge issue because we live in like an urban heat island. And so if we could replace all of the gas infrastructure, all the gas pipelines with water pipelines that can serve as sources and sinks of heating and cooling, we can do that. And we just signed a contract to do a pilot project in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so we're going to be having many more presentations about thermal energy networks, and I hope some of you join, because we really believe that this is the name of the game and the answer, especially for buildings. Some of the next steps, and I'll put this in the chat. We have online forums coming up, ways to participate in our local campaign to shut down a massive LNG facility in our neighborhood. And then this is something I added, I think this crowd might be very interested in. Justin Noble, who's a Rolling Stone reporter, just published his first book called Petroleum 238, which is about the radioactivity in frack waste. And we are hosting his book launch on Wednesday in Brooklyn, New York. So I'll put the link in the chat if you're interested to come. He is an incredible speaker, and he's going to be bringing a lot of folks from the front lines to also speak to us here in Brooklyn. Just want to remind you the way the industry sees our region, and this is the way we see our future, and we can all dream and vision together and make that vision ours. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. That was a remarkable presentation as well. We are going to have time for questions and answers and comments, as long as they're brief comments, about the contents of these three very informative talks. But first, I was asked to give a kind of brief summary of things coming up. Now, Kim has done so with some of the things which are very good to know, and we should all try to attend what we can. There's one in particular that I want to mention that has not been brought up, and let me just get to that in 1 second on my screen. Okay, it's called the Global Summit on Renewable Energy.
It's the wrapper over there.
Right, which will be in Ottawa, Canada, on September 15th and 16th. And the idea is to bring experts, professionals, academics, and government experts and others to Ottawa to discuss how we go forward. How we go forward really as not only nations, but in the global unified way. So that is coming up. I hope to be there if they let me in. And I think many of the people, on this panel and in this audience would likely qualify to attend as well. Another goal, of course, is to stop the production and use of PFAS, polymer plastics, which come in part from military bases, including one right near Trenton, New Jersey. They poison our waters, and they cause many different types of cancers. They're known as PFAS, but there's a variety of them. Some of them are used for things like Teflon, things you would not expect. Some of them are used in firefighting chemicals. Another thing is, of course, to promote climate justice using the billions of dollars that remain from the United States IRA Climate Act, Infrastructure Reduction, I'm sorry, Inflation Reduction Act, which is also a climate act, to provide jobs in clean energy, especially in at-risk low-income communities. Another goal is to push the EPA and the Department of Energy to be more effective on clean air, water, and nuclear weapons, and as well the State Department on renewing disarmament treaties like the New START Treaty. Several of you have talked about the incredible existential risks from nuclear weapons. You also spoke about the regional gas emissions. We need to get our governors more involved in actually enforcing the regional gas emission reduction standards. And finally, there is the UN Summit on the Future coming in September as well. So there is more, of course, but civil society, and that is us, can take the lead in those areas where the government has not done the job. And of course, it goes without saying that voting in the primaries, Pennsylvania is coming up on Tuesday, and in November. And another group that we're familiar with, Common Cause, has recruited thousands of volunteers to get out the vote. And we really need to do that. It will make a huge difference in preserving our democracy. So now we will ask for your questions and comments. Please put them right in the chat box. You
They are
can,
already here, yes. We have
yes,
a few questions already. I'm sorry you guys probably don't see them. So there's a question from Kip saying there is a concern that we are just not going to ramp up the use of renewables fast enough to fill the gap as we move away from fossil fuels. How do we think we are going to fill the gap? How are we going to are we going to have to bring it in nuclear power? And if so, is there time given how long it will take to get nuclear plant running?
who is that directed to, Manisha?
There was no who it is. I think it would be the Timon or Erica if they can reply to this.
I can say something quickly if you want.
Yeah.
First of all, as I mentioned this book called No Miracles Needed. We have the technologies now, today, to fill this gap. We just have to do it. We have to make the commitments. We got to do it. We got to put pressure on these companies so they'll put pressure on the Congress to just do what we know we have to do. We do not need nuclear power. There's a whole long section in my book about nuclear power and the pros and cons, mostly cons. As you mentioned already in the questionnaire, it can't be done in the time we need. You know, it's not about filling the gap, because it takes up to 20 years to build a nuclear power plant. We don't have that kind of time. So we've got to be out there pushing for the alternatives that we know already exist and just getting them moving.
So Erica or Kim, do you have anything to add on that question? Okay.
Kim, you go ahead. I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I just, you know, although we fight, we have a focus at Sane Energy Project to fight fracked gas infrastructure. We are vehemently against nuclear. We are against anything that is extractive, and we definitely believe in thermal energy networks as a solution. And we have already, you know, passed mandates and laws and policy in New York State to ensure that that is our future. And we, you know, as I mentioned, just signed a contract with a geothermal installer for a affordable housing complex here in New York City, and we are going to be working together with the community to network out from there. So people do not have to be connected to a gas grid for heating, and they don't need to put air conditioners in their window for cooling. So you get heating and cooling from thermal energy networks, and we believe that that is a definitely, we're going to be investing all of our power into making sure that that replaces the fossil fuel energy system.
Very good. Do you have any additional?
I can wait until the next question. I think those are some good responses there.
Another question, Larry has posed us a few questions. I'm going to go with one here, and then we can look into more. What can we do to change the composition of the judiciary, the executive and the legislative, to get them to reject the bribery of oligarchy and to truly serve all the people they serve?
I mean, I can talk a little bit about CFPA's work with legislation. So I know the Coalition for Peace Action has been very involved in lobbying for peace legislation at the state and national level. So going to Trenton, New Jersey, as well as Washington, D.C., and meeting our legislators at all levels. So whether that's the Assembly, state Senate level, congressional levels, and really building those relationships with our the staffers of all of those different departments. Also doing briefings, so being able to really bring informative knowledge on these topics directly to our candidates, and to be able to show the memberships of our organizations. So when we go to a candidate briefing, and we're able to say, you know, we have X number of members, they believe strongly in this, that, you know, candidates and current legislators that listen to those numbers, and there's power in those numbers to be able to tell them how many people in their constituency really feel a certain way about a certain topic. So I'd say from the grassroots level, that's one way.
And that's the Peace Voter Project you're referring to, right? Okay. That you can find that at peacecoalition.org as well.
Another question for Mr. Dr. Wallace. In terms of reducing our holdings in nuclear weapons, sorry, I forgot. This question is also from Cape Cherry. In terms of reducing our holdings in nuclear weapons, what is your view of phasing out the third leg of triad-based ICBMs?
Sure. I mean, we have to get rid of all nuclear weapons. That's the bottom line. We have to. Every single nuclear weapon that exists is a threat to the whole planet, and there are tens of thousands of them out there in 9 countries only, and we know how to get rid of them. We have treaties that have begun the process. We just have to finish the job, and we have to do that. The most dangerous leg of the triad that you were talking about, the ICBMs, are the nuclear missiles that are on hair trigger alert all across Montana and Wyoming and so on, and they're ready to launch at a moment's notice because they're sitting ducks. And if there's a real or imagined threat of them being under attack, they have to launch them before they're destroyed. So they're ready to be launched all the time. It makes it hugely dangerous. We've already had many incidents where they thought they were under attack when they weren't, and they almost launched them. This has happened not just during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but at least 12 other times that we know of, that these weapons have been ready to launch at they only have 3 or 4 minutes to make a decision about this. So it is very dangerous, and we need to address that. But the weapons that are also on submarines are out at sea. They're also very dangerous. they're all dangerous. So, let's not put all our effort into just getting rid of ICBMs. We need everybody to be pushing to fulfill the commitments the US has already made more than 50 years ago to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the earth and be done with this ridiculous threat that we're all facing.
Thank you, Timon. Another question from Larry Holman. How much real estate will be lost to sea level rise due to climate change? What will this do to, I don't know how to say it. What will the price of housing, what will it cost, I think, due to this for housing for human beings?
I think that was hard to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
You're talking
because
about the risk from sea level
level
rising
rise
and
and
threatening
climate
housing
change.
on
Yeah,
the coast.
yeah. On the coast, we are seeing a lot of them in the news all over. I don't know if anyone has anything on this.
Well, I can add just very briefly again if you want.
Okay.
I mean, maybe someone else has more, but I mean, we're talking about as things are going right now. If we do not address the carbon emissions much more drastically than we are at the moment, we're talking about sea level rises by the end of this century of 1 to 3 feet, which will have a huge impact on. I mean, it's not just real estate prices. I mean, you won't be able to live in many parts of Florida. I mean, they'll be underwater. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because literally, if the ice starts melting across the Antarctic and so on, if we don't get this under control, we're talking about sea level rises of not just 2 feet, but 200 feet. That's how much the sea level would rise if we don't address climate. And 200 feet, I mean, I don't know how high people are above sea level on this call, but I mean, most places in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, let alone, most parts of the country or the world, are going to be underwater. It's, never mind the price of the real estate. There won't be real estate. It's going to be underwater. So we have to deal with this.
And there will be no more realtors, and there will be no more industry, and there will be very few people looking at each other. How can we survive in this extreme heat? Yeah, humanity is more or less done by then. So let's forget about that part. So the discussions indeed in terms of the real estate are interesting, but the infrastructure around it is the harbors, everything else is going to be under enormous stress. The question is, what are the politicians going to do about it? Are they going to focus on organizing carbon sequestration systems and getting on our systems under control and stopping the climate change? Or are we going to address the infrastructure problem? Higher dikes, more production of these dikes, etc., etc. And you create a whole other dynamic around which way you have to try to get the politicians to start thinking differently in these contexts and bringing the solutions, not around how to get better roads or higher roads, no, how to get back to the ecology and fixing our society in such a way that we are living with nature and not exploiting it. And in that particular dynamic, I think that this particular discussion is pretty darn relevant in terms of setting the tone for a dialogue that all politicians in the whole world needs to start listening to STEM scientists and to the young people who take note of it. The whole notion of what we are doing here is a little bit here, a little bit there, but the bigger picture overall is that the UN can play an enormous important role in setting the whole tone for doing industries and making the things different and in different ways. That I think is very much an important element to take out of this whole thing. We cannot do things in our own neck of the woods and discussing there and not seeing the bigger picture in which all this thing needs to happen. I believe that these discussions, what happens in New Jersey and in New York, need to be repeated in India, in the Himalayas, in China, and elsewhere. And we need to take note of these things. So it's an
It is
interesting.
Christian, if I may, it is a global discussion, and that's why I mentioned the conference in Ottawa.
I'm
And
very
we
glad to hear it.
were able to go. I would love to just have a dialogue about it, but we want to let other people have a chance too.
Yeah.
But let me mention, Christian Morsink is a real leader on climate. He's the former president of the UN Association of Greater Philadelphia. He's the chair or president, I'm not sure which, of the Global Water Alliance based at the University of Pennsylvania, but it's a very active group, and he's worth listening to. He's got a lot to say. Manisha, do we have another question?
Yes, from Sandra Johnson for Tim and Wallace. When you mentioned wave energy, were you speaking of harnessing the power of the ocean?
Yeah. There's already wave energy projects out there. There's tidal projects out there. There's a lot more research needed to bring it to scale. But I mean, there's some fascinating other ways of generating electricity. I mean, what Kim was talking about with the thermal energy systems, for instance. There's so many really excellent possibilities, and we just need to really put our full speed ahead, efforts into this. As Christian was saying just now, I mean, half-hearted approaches is not enough. We have to address this, and the technologies we have. Technologies already, but we need to figure out how to fit them all together, how to make them usable and to scale, and to be able to roll them out fairly in different parts of the world, how to do it without, destroying the environment in the process. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done, but we have huge numbers of new ways of producing electricity, including, I mean, just to give an example, I don't know if anybody here has heard of gravity batteries. But, there's experiments with large, heavy objects like concrete being lifted off the ground when we don't need using power to lift them off the ground. And then when you need electricity, they go down and churn a turbine. I mean, there's so many things we could be doing. We're not doing them.
Wow.
It's like the old water wheel principle, right?
Yeah.
Another
Getting
question
all
from
the
Kip
butterflies in the
Cherry.
world flying in the same direction, you have an enormous amount of energy. But anyway, yeah, I like Tim's idea that there's enough technology available, get it to work, but also adapt it to the environment. Do not bring humongous wind turbines to the shores of Senegal when you have local folks who can make small things much faster. Those are the kind of things what I'm talking about. We have the technology adapted to the environment and start doing it.
Thank you, Christian. From Kip Cherry to all the panelists, would you please comment on the fallacy of hydrogen, that it is made from natural gas and it takes considerable amount of power to make the conversion? Except for a very specialized use, it is more efficient to keep natural gas as natural gas. At this point, we have not been able to commercially make hydrogen from water. That was her way of putting it. Any comments on it?
I can hop in quickly. I mean, we just got through deep negotiations for the last year with National Grid, who's the local gas utility here. They see the writing on the wall that, people want to move away from gas. It's a finite fuel. And they're putting forward greenwashing alternatives like hydrogen, like quote unquote renewable natural gas. These things are just keeping their business model in the same way of dealing with extraction from a centralized source, and they can be the distributors of that. We need to actually just change the entire way the economy is built. And that is about taking away corporate power and building a publicly owned energy model, where things are not a big centralized hub and owned by, a few corporations. Hydrogen is extractive. It is not healthy for us. It is not something that we want to fight for. And we fought very hard to prevent National Grid from being able to build hydrogen here in New York. They're really pushing for it, and we are going to keep pushing back until we adopt actually, sane energy models like thermal energy networks, like distributed energy resources like solar. I'll stop there because I'm sure other panelists have things to add.
Hydrogen can also be highly explosive.
Yeah. Another one is from Driss Larafi. Following the recent clash between Iran and Israel, could we say Tehran is going nuclear and probably going to be a nuclear armed state, or at least acquiring the ability of having a bomb in the basement?
I can respond to that if you want, but maybe Ed wants to. So we all know that that Iran is an advanced industrial country. It has the capacity to make nuclear weapons, as about 30 other countries do, and we know that the Iran deal that was signed several years ago was an agreement for them not to do that. In exchange for having other sanctions removed and so on, and we know that Trump pulled out of that, and that fell apart. President Biden has not got us back into that, which puts Iran under enormous pressure internally to keep going with the nuclear weapons development, but also externally. They remain under these enormous pressures of sanctions and so on, which they can't sustain. And so, the recent conflict, with Israel and apart from Gaza, the fact that there's an ongoing war between Israel and Iran and its various proxies around that region. This is a hugely dangerous threat to all of us, because a nuclear weapon going off anywhere is going to affect everybody on the whole planet. Israel has nuclear weapons, which they pretend they don't, and I only recently found out why we don't know officially that Israel has nuclear weapons, and that's because of something called the Glenn Amendment, which prohibits U.S. military aid to any country that develops nuclear weapons outside of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which includes Israel. So everybody pretends that they don't have nuclear weapons, because otherwise we would have to stop giving them military aid, which we should stop doing right this minute. And of course, Congress just agreed to continue. But the idea that Iran, we're pushing Iran into building nuclear weapons. That's the reality. The world is pushing them in that direction. Whether they will do that or not, I don't know. They're one of the signatories. They're one of the countries that voted for the nuclear ban treaty. I've met with members of the Iranian delegation at the UN. They don't want nuclear weapons. They don't want them to have them themselves, and they don't want anybody else to have them. But unless there's agreements about getting rid of nuclear weapons, we're encouraging all these other countries, including Iran, to develop them for themselves. We've got to stand up and say, no country should have them, including us, and we got to work to get rid of them all.
Thank you, Timon. I know what you said was so true. Ed Aguilar sent us a link about Narendra Modi bragging at rallies that everybody can sign, but India is not going to sign any treaty of that kind because they feel so much more stronger with that weapon in their hands. So, and I'm sure there are so many other countries doing the same. We have politicians all over who are strongmen right now. Ed, do you want to comment?
You mentioned Modi. You're absolutely right about him. In addition, on Iran, Ambassador Sayed Mousavi, former ambassador from Iran to, I believe, to the United Nations, is now a professor at Princeton, and he said very much the same thing about Iran that Timon was talking about. Iran does not really want, it certainly doesn't want a large-scale war with Israel. I think they're both at the moment trying to tamp things down, but you never know, when things can get out of hand when they're already so tense and fraught. So we really have to push Israel to to cool their jets and to essentially stop occupying Gaza and develop a two-state solution. But that's a whole other discussion for another.
It is worthwhile noting, I think, in my opinion, that Ukraine gave up the nuclear arms when it became an independent nation, and thereby gave up a pretty good defense possibility in the context of what Putin is doing now. It's you have to read a little bit more here, as far as I'm concerned, why these guys are pushing for having nuclear weapons, and how that plays out, how nuclear and the state is getting protection themselves, etc. It's a mixed bag. I am not so sure. We need to get rid of it, that's for sure. But we need to do that in such a way that we have some alternatives to offer to what it actually means if we do protect each other. If you give it up, what are the protections to getting this kind of thing happening to happen, what now happened in Ukraine? It's not an easy thing to do, and I'm not on the inside of it at all. I'm only looking for the outside, and boy, is
Well,
that
remember, Christian, Mikhail Gorbachev actually offered a plan for what he called common security,
right. I know.
right, where all of Europe would disarm, and you would
Yeah.
protect each other rather than continue the Cold War. But he was turned down. He was
I
turned
know.
down by.
Exactly, you got the idea. And that was in Reykjavik, in a very nice cold place where the head should be cool, but nevertheless.
Let's get another question.
Sorry.
Timon, did you, Dr. Timon Wallace, did you want to say anything? I see
Well,
you
I just
unmuted yourself.
I just wanted to correct one little point from Christian, which is that because this is mentioned all the time. If only Ukraine had not given up its nuclear weapons, would Russia have invaded? Well, the reality is, Ukraine never had nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons, and they were under the control the whole time by the Russian military department of missiles. Ukraine never had control of those missiles and would never have had control. I mean, if they weren't dismantled, they would have gone back to Russia. So it's kind of misleading to say that, but I mean it's a common misunderstanding about what happened in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ed, I think he stepped away. I know he was going to close. I think we have about 5 minutes left. I want to thank all the 3 speakers. It's wonderful that you are doing good work, and it's wonderful to see you engage our network and our members today on some of this, on this very special day. Can't thank you enough. And please stay in touch with our network. Send us links of all the works you are doing. We can continue to engage others on different topics. We would like to invite you again, also all the 3 panelists, to speak at other events and share what you are doing so we can tell others about it, and also share with us how to fight and advocate for the work you are doing. If you have something like that, please do share it with us also. I know Ed was going to
There you
Hi,
go.
Ed. Are
Hear
you
you.
going to close down? It's now 4 minutes, yeah, 5 minutes left.
Say that again?
Close it, do the close for the event.
Well, I think that basically I have I have done the close that I was going to do, other than to say once again to thank all of the co-sponsoring organizations. Any of them is welcome to put, their identification on the chat as well for further contact. I want to thank the speakers again, because they were certainly remarkable, all three. And I want to encourage people to vote. This is an incredibly important time for people to vote. Our primary comes up in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. And there are challenges from very powerful, very wealthy billionaires to several of our more progressive candidates and congresspeople. The CFPA does not endorse candidates, but I think we all know who we're talking about. And it's important for people to vote and to help mobilize your friends and family to vote. That's really, in the time we have, the only thing that I would add. I don't know if there's anything in conclusion that Erica or Kim or Timon might want to add as well. But I want to thank everyone for coming. And we hope that you will join us in, I think it's June 7th. We have the editor, the executive editor of The Nation magazine, Katrina vanden Heuvel, will be speaking at our CFPA event, June 9th, rather. Jen has reminded me it's June 9th. And you can find how to get there on the Peace Coalition website. And that is a live event. Is that right, Jen? Anyway, I think if we
Yes,
if
Ed,
we are
sorry. Yes, it's a live event in
Okay.
Princeton. All the
So if-
information will be on our website under upcoming events.
okay. Any other announcements that any of the panel wants to mention that we have not already heard about? If not, I want to thank everyone again for coming. And this was, I think, a very educational and interesting experience. Thanks very much.
Thank
And
you.
we'll
Thanks,
see you next
everyone.
time.
Let it
Okay.
be tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.